During the War of 1812, the Siege of Fort Meigs in what is now Perrysburg, northwest Ohio, lasted from late April to early May 1813. To stop an American attack on Detroit, a small British Army regiment with Indian assistance tried to seize the newly built fort. The British from Canada's north had already taken Fort Detroit in the Great Lakes region the year before. The British were finally compelled to relieve the siege after failing to seize the fort, despite a botched American rescue attempt and sortie that resulted in significant deaths. After the Siege of Detroit, the American Army, led by Brigadier General William Hull (1753 to 1825), surrendered in the early stages of the War of 1812 to 1815. The Americans established the Army of the Northwest in order to retake Fort Detroit and the town of Detroit. Before William Henry Harrison (1773 to 1841), a congressional delegate, secretary of the former Northwest Territory, first governor of the Indiana Territory, and eventual 9th president (1841), was commissioned as a major general in the regular United States Army and given command by 4th President James Madison. This army was briefly commanded by Brigadier General James Winchester (1752 to 1826). Bad weather and a lack of supplies hindered Harrison's approach. His army's main detachment, led by Winchester, lost the Battle of Frenchtown on January 22, 1813. Harrison withdrew his main body to the Maumee, also known as the Miami-Dulac River. Despite criticism from future 5th President James Monroe, who was acting as the temporary Secretary of War for the United States, Harrison chose not to immediately resume his advance and instead ordered the construction of multiple forts to guard the rivers and trails that his army would use in any future advance. Among the most significant were Fort Stephenson on the Sandusky River in the northwest part of the decade-old state and Fort Meigs on the Maumee River, which was named for Ohio Governor Return J. Meigs, Jr. On February 1, 1813, Harrison led an army of 4,000 soldiers, mostly militia, down the Maumee to the intended location of Fort Meigs and started building the fort. He traveled to the mouth of the Maumee and considered launching a hit-and-run attack across the frozen Lake Erie on the British position at Amherstburg in Upper Canada. But he retreated to the partially constructed fort after seeing that the ice on the frozen lake was already disintegrating. Since the militia battalions assigned to the duty had reached the end of their enlistment, he discovered that Joel B. Leftwich, the commander he had left in charge, had departed with all of his men. They had stopped construction and were using the chopped wood as firewood. Harrison dissolved his troops and left for Cincinnati, Ohio to the south on the Ohio River to form a new army, as the enlistments of his Ohio and Kentucky militias were also due to expire. To finish building the fort, he left Army Corps of Engineers Major Eleazar D. Wood. The garrison was made up of several hundred poorly dressed troops from the U.S. Infantry's 17th and 19th Regiments, as well as militiamen from Virginia and Pennsylvania, whose own enlistments were about to end. The fort was close to the Miami Rapids on the south side of the Maumee. The remains of the former British Fort Miami, the scene of the crucial Battle of Fallen Timbers in 1794, were located across the river. The biggest structure built in North America at the time, Fort Meigs covered 8 acres, 32,000 meters squared. 8 blockhouses were connected by a 15-foot picket fence that surrounded the area. The east and west sides were sheltered by ravines, while the north face was shielded by the Maumee. To create an open glacis, the south face was stripped of all timber. Early spring's bad weather kept the British from attacking while the fort was still at risk. The Americans were building a flotilla to take control of Lake Erie, and Major General Henry Proctor, the British Army commander on the Detroit frontier, had been urged to attack Fort Presque Isle, modern-day Erie, Pennsylvania. However, Proctor refused to do so until he had significant reinforcements. In order to thwart American plans for a summer campaign and possibly seize supplies, he instead chose to attack Fort Meigs. After learning of Proctor's plans, Harrison quickly sent 300 troops down the Maumee, bringing the fort's garrison to 1,100 soldiers. He had convinced Kentucky Governor Isaac Shelby to use Brigadier General Green Clay to organize a brigade of 1,200 Kentucky troops. Harrison was followed down the Maumee by Clay's column, but they did not get at the fort until it was under siege. On April 26, Proctor's army disembarked near the Maumee's mouth. His force included 462 Canadian militiamen, 423 members of the 41st Regiment of Foot, 63 members of the Royal Newfoundland Regiment, 16 members of other regiments, and 31 members of the Royal Artillery. Additionally, he had about 1,200 Native American warriors under the command of Wyandot leader Roundhead and Shawnee chief Tecumseh. 9 lighter cannons, 2 24-pounder guns that had been taken at Detroit, and 2 gunboats equipped with 9-pounder guns made up his armament. The British troops moved along the Maumee and set up cannons over the course of many days. One was positioned on the south side of the river, while the most were on the north. Additionally, the majority of the Native Americans were informally occupying the fort on the south bank of the river. Harrison gave the order to quickly erect traverses, or embankments, 12 feet high within the fort while the British set up their cannons. On May 1st, the British guns started fire, but the majority of the cannon fire sunk harmlessly into the damp ground of the embankments and traverses. Harrison dispatched a messenger to Clay's men on May 2nd, instructing him to have some of them spike the British guns on the north bank before retreating into the fort, while a sortie from the fort targeted the south bank cannon. The Kentuckians were caught completely off guard. A unit from Clay's brigade, commanded by Colonel William Dudley, landed from boats on the north side of the river early on May 5. Dudley's command included 45 regular U.S. Army soldiers, 60 members of the 13th Kentucky Detached Regiment of Militia, and 761 members of his own 10th Kentucky Detached Regiment of Militia. By using ramrods rather than handspikes to spike the guns after storming the North Bank's batteries, this army was only temporarily disabled the cannons. Then some of Dudley's soldiers became unruly. As Tecumseh's soldiers led them farther into the forest, a portion of the Kentuckian army chased them while being fired on by Native Americans in the woods. Major James Shelby took charge at the battery, and Dudley followed in an effort to return them. Many Kentuckians were killed, and Shelby was forced to surrender when Major Adam Muir led 3 companies of the 41st Foot and 1 Canadian militia from the British camp and assaulted the battery. The disorganized Kentuckians were wiped out in their confusing battle with the natives in the woods. Only 150 of Dudley's 866 officers and soldiers made it to the fort. Dudley's Massacre or Dudley's Defeat are the names given to this. To support the garrison, the remainder of Clay's troops, which had not participated in the assault on the batteries, arrived at the fort without incident. The American sortie against the British artillery on the south bank was only partially successful. With 350 regulars and volunteers under his command, Colonel John Miller grabbed 41 prisoners and gained control of the battery. But Miller's detachment was forced back inside the fort by Captain Richard Bullock's counterattack, which involved 300 Indians, 2 companies of militia, and the 141st Foot's flank troops. Following the fight, Dudley's prisoners were transferred to the abandoned Fort Miami, which was close to the British camp, for incarceration. Here, Tecumseh, Lieutenant Colonel Matthew Elliott, and Captain Thomas McKee of the Indian Department convinced the native warriors to cease their massacre of the prisoners, which resulted in the deaths of numerous Americans. According to legend, Tecumseh questioned Proctor about why he had not put an end to the killing. Proctor reportedly said, "Be gone," when he said that the Indians could not be forced to comply. "You're not capable. Put on your petticoats now." "I conquer to save, you to kill," was how Tecumseh reprimanded Proctor in another account of the event. According to eyewitnesses, the slaughter claimed the lives of 12 to 14 inmates. The British referred to the action of May 5 as the Battle of the Miami because it was fought next to the Miami-Dulac River. The Royal Welsh Regiment, the 41st Regiment successor in the British Army, received the Miami Battle Honor in recognition of their effective performance in the conflict. The Essex and Kent Scottish Regiment and the Royal Newfoundland Regiment both wear the Battle Honor Maumee in the Canadian Army to honor their ancestor units' involvement in the conflict. The American Army's 5 active regular battalions, 1-3 Infantry, 2-3 Infantry, 4-3 Infantry, 2-7 Infantry, and 3-7 Infantry continue the heritage of the former 17th, 19th, and 24th Infantry regiments, some of which served at Fort Meigs. The fort was also built with the participation of Virginia militia forces that later became the 150th Cavalry, RNG, West Virginia. According to the official British casualty report, 40 people were taken, 47 were injured, and 14 were killed. Although it was scheduled for May 5, it seems to have covered the whole siege until and including May 5, because it featured Canadian militiaman Captain Laurent Bondy, who was wounded by artillery fire on May 3 and is believed to have died as a result. Roundhead's brother, Jean-Baptiste, was one of 19 Native Americans who were slain or injured as part of the British alliance.